ABC Sport Digital Radio, your home of cricket.
When the game has just begun and they're looking for a run, there's just one voice for the cricket, so they say. He's everything to cricket, cricket's everything to him, you know. The game is not the same without McGilvray.
Alan McGilvray, The Game Goes On. In this special two-part program, the ABC's most distinguished cricket commentator looks back on half a century of Australian Test cricket history. With part one, his interviewer, Norman May.
Alan McGilvray broadcast his first cricket match for the ABC in 1934 when he was still playing for New South Wales. He retired in September 1985, more than 50 years later. And during that time, he broadcast a total of 225 test matches, all involving Australia. Now, in these programs, first of all, The Greatest Match, we're inviting Alan to select games and analyse them for his greatest match in all that period. And welcome to Alan McGilvray to the ABC microphones. Alan, how do you go about selecting your greatest matches?
I look at it from an overall point of view, taking 5 days test match, the games that have contained the public interest for those 5 days, when everything is in a balance every day. One could never pick out who's going to win it from the first to the third day. And I believe the 1948 match at Leeds, the fourth test match, at all times you could go to the game and you say, well, this is very open. And I found that when I visited Leeds every morning. When the fact is they scored 1,723 runs in 5 days, is an extraordinary total. But that's why I would have selected the 1948 fourth test. I come now to the 1960 tied test in Brisbane against the West Indies. That didn't quite fit my thoughts, because I think the interest in that game started about the first and a day and a half, and then back to the last day. So it really doesn't support my claim that I'm looking at overall. But seeing it was the first tied test ever played in history, I think that captured my imagination, and so I gave that my vote as one of the greatest and most exciting. It certainly was to broadcast. And then finally to the 1961 fourth test at Manchester, Australia captained by Richie Benaud. That was another game that was filled with daily interest, and coming right to the death, England had the game won, and then Australia got in right off the floor. As Benaud took his 6 wickets and mostly bowling round the wicket. That was an intense game of cricket, and where I often felt that England should have won it, and I'm not going to take credit away from Benaud, and particularly Harvey, who was his advisor there. I think England lost it, but I'm not going to take credit, as I repeat, away from Benaud. He won it with the help of Harvey and superb exhibition of fielding. So we had good fielding, we had good bowling, we had good batting, and good public interest. And I might add, it's of great value to a broadcaster to be able to be deeply involved in the game, and I think you'll get a fair representation to the public to whom you're talking, and giving an assessment daily, as you see, and leaving yourself in doubt as to who will be the ultimate winner. That has I have tried to assess my selection, Norman, in all the test matches I've done.
Well, let's look at these games in detail. First of all, the fourth test, Bradman's team in 1948, Australia versus England at Leeds. Now, this was the fourth test of the series. Now, what was the situation in regard to the Ashes at that stage?
Australia had won 2, the third was drawn, so Australia had actually retained the Ashes then. And so England, under the captaincy of Norman Yardley, who was one of the best captains from England I've known, he had an attacking approach. A lot of other captains in later years, particularly Len Hutton and Ray Illingworth, looked at it from a point of view, as I knew them well, we mustn't lose, and that was the approach. And so I think the whole situation was left to Yardley. He never failed to attack. He was unfortunate, and that the England selectors did not include a leg spin bowler.
Well, I was going to bring that point in now, Alan, that without a leg spinner in the team, but this series, and it's the only one I know of, was played under the 55-over law. In other words, you could take a new ball after only 55 six-ball overs. And this almost legislated the leg spinner out of the game.
Well, when we got there, I thought, now, this is an extraordinary situation. And Bradman had a grin all over his face when he felt that was going to be 55 overs. He was highly delighted. He made no comment, of course, but you could see he was so pleased in casual conversation I had with him. he was equipped, you see. He had Linville Miller, possibly the greatest combination of fast bowlers I have ever seen. And then he had Bill Johnson, who was not very well regarded today, but Bill Johnson was a great bowler. And in fact, he took the same number of wickets on that tour as Ray Linville. That was 27. So here he was with three excellent seam bowlers, and he merely had to use, say, Sammy Loxton to just fill in while the others were spilling. And so 55 overs with a new ball. I so well recall, Norman, going down to afternoon tea when the second new ball was taken. I think it was at Leeds. And I sat in the tent, and then a great number of people came in. The new ball had been taken, and I watched the England faces, and there'd be a roar, and someone would say, "And who was it? Hutton? Oh, no." And the whole disappointment in that tent was amazing. They wouldn't watch the second new ball on that day because of the devastating bowling of Linville and Miller. And so it was, to me, a godsend to Australia and a blessing for Bradman to have such an equipment. And England at that time really only had Bedser.
Yes, well, this is the point. Now, in this particular game, it's the only time in the whole series that Linville, Miller and Johnson didn't break through in England's first innings. England scored a very big total, 496. Washbrook made 141, Edridge 111. Len Hutton, who'd been dropped for the previous test, came back and made 81. And even Alec Bedser, as a night watchman, made 79. Now, we've got a very prophetic piece of broadcasting, and you were on your first tour of England, and here's what you said at the end of England's innings.
Now, Miller is about to bowl to Yardley. And Yardley he's bowled. All out. England are all out, 496. And it's not as healthy a score as I anticipated might after the start this morning, but nevertheless it's still a very good one, and it's going to be hard for Australia to pull this game out and win it from here. But I'm still not prepared to say, although John Arlott doesn't agree with me. He says that England can't lose. I think that you never know in a game of cricket.
And that turned out to be a very prophetic statement. That was your first tour of England, Alan, and I can recall you saying to me many years ago in my first experience in broadcasting back in 1958, you said, never attempt to forecast the outcome of a game of cricket. Now, there was a case of John Arlott thinking that England couldn't lose, but you weren't so sure.
Well, I'd had my lesson many times when I was captain of assuming that I had the game won and found I hadn't, and so I never let it affect my broadcasting. I never liked predicting. The game of cricket is too uncertain. But I looked at it then as, how can you determine the result of the game with a man like Bradman in your side, as it later on proved to be correct. But in that case, I was well aware of the fact that Linville and Johnson and Miller didn't make the early breaks in that innings, but it was due to some magnificent batting by Hutton and Washbrook and later Edridge, and they set Australia back. But once they made the break, there came Bradman in, right, I'll fire all guns now, and he brought back into the attack Johnson, Miller and Linville. And when you look at it overall, that innings, the last 8 wickets fell for 73 runs. So the potency of that attack was clearly evidenced, and the brilliant captaincy of Bradman when he let things run on and suddenly had the break and in he went, and it was successful.
Well, that score went from 2 for 423 to all out 496. Now, there was just a little bit of rain about at that stage when Australia came into bat. They lost Morris early for 6 and Hassett for 13. Australia were in a bit of trouble, and in typical fashion, Bradman tried to hit his way out of that trouble.
It's quite fast. It's not by any means as fast as Linville, and it's a slingy action, completely out of the normal traditions of fast bowling, but it certainly propels the ball very fast indeed from one set of wickets in the general direction of the other. There's another one, that's short, and Bradman's hooked it for 4. And that is fielded by a gentleman in a grey suit whose return to the wicket is not at all accurate. And at this juncture, Edridge decides that perhaps at least a forward short leg is something of a luxury and waves him back as deep as the umpire, where he's forced to borrow Pollard's cap. That's Cranston. Pollard remains short. Cranston can't get Pollard's cap on. Edridge bowls to Bradman. He hooks him for another 4. 4 to square leg. 2 hooks for 4 of consecutive balls, and they're Bradman hooks. They're not lifted. He rolls the wrist as he plays the stroke, and the ball goes out there like a flash, all along the ground. Now, Cranston, capless, is retreating into the country on the leg side. Not too far, but behind the square leg umpire. And Pollard, with his cap back, also retreats, but only about 2 yards. And Edrich comes up now and bowls again to Bradman. A full toss on his hips, glided away on the leg side. They take 1, they take 2, it's bounced out of Hutton's hands over the boundary for 4, giving Bradman 3 fours off this Edrich over.
The commentator there was John Allett.
What a magnificent piece of broadcasting that was. Colourful to the extreme, wasn't it? Even the man picking up the ball. I've always enjoyed working with John.
Was that his first Test series?
Yes, his first Test series against Australia, and mine too.
When you say yours, was the first in England, of course.
Yes, it was.
But that innings of Don Bradman's, his intentions were quite clear, but it didn't last very long.
Well, that's typical Don, you know. He was unlucky, perhaps, when he was out bowled by Pollard. I have a memory that he might have pulled that ball back on his stumps, but his aggression was always evident there. He'd never believed in letting bowlers dominate. He often told me that. I don't want to be dictated to by bowlers, and rarely was he. He wasn't even then, but 3 magnificent shots. But that was the art. I'm not going to let you dominate, and he picked an easy mark too in Edrich because he wasn't a very good bowler.
Well, Australia then were 3 wickets down for 68 in reply to England's 496. They were in real trouble, and this was the responsibility that a youngster called Neil Harvey faced. His very first match for Australia, he was 19 years old.
Well, that's a wonderful story. I've often thought of it, and the great achievement then by that young man. He was very, very nervous when he went out there, and I was only speaking to Keith Miller not a few days ago about that innings, and I said, what was he like when he met you? You walked across to meet him, Keith. He said, you know what he said? He was so nervous. He said, what's going on here, Keith? What's going on here? And he said he was almost stuttering, and I sensed his nervousness, and he said, I said to him then, I'll have a look at this fellow Laker. He might worry you for a while. Let me have a look at him, and you go down the other end and see what he's doing. But he did exactly that. And Harvey immediately, and he also told me this a few months ago, I said, what was it like when you went out there? He said, I didn't know how to hold a bat, Mac. I was so nervous. And then he said, suddenly, Keith went down the wicket to Laker and hit him right over my head for 6. A little later, he did it again, and over he went again. And then Keith walked down the end of the over. He said, feel better now, young fella? And immediately, Neil said, I felt so much better. The confidence I established in Miller, I knew he was there with me. And as it turned out, and I so often said, Neil got the 100, but Miller got the credit because Miller looked after that young boy. Laker would have worried him. He was a left-hand batsman, and he was spinning away, Laker, and that would have worried Neil. But Miller didn't let him have a look at him for a long time. And when he got on top of him, of course, then it was another story.
Well, Keith Miller and Neil Harvey, a wonderful partnership, 121, and it came to an end in fairly unfortunate circumstances.
189 for 3, 58 to Miller, 61 to Harvey. Yardley again to Miller, and he has a tremendous lunge at that one. I believe he's caught.
That dismissal, it doesn't tell you very much in that description what actually happened, but it was quite unusual, wasn't it?
I remembered it well, confirmed again by Keith later. He didn't know actually what happened himself, but when he went for that sweep shot, not that he often played that type of shot, he fell over, the ball hit the back of the bat, hit Evans on the head, bounced away to short fine leg where Edrich took the catch. It was not known at the time until it was confirmed later when Evans came in with a bump in his head. But that's how Keith was dismissed, an extraordinary way to go off the back of the bat. And he said to me, when I spoke to him, I said, how would I hit with the back of the bat? I'm a stupid idiot. He was really a modest man, Nugget.
Yes, but the thing about that, for the ball to come from the bat to hit the keeper on the head to get caught at fine leg, of all places, you can only describe that as just sheer bad luck.
Yeah, well, it was. But I think he was so intent on taking care of the bowlers at that time, Keith, and he decided to assert himself. Instead of going on quietly and helping Harvey, well, he had done that, but I think he then said to himself, well, Harvey's all right now, I'll go after them. And as soon as he went after them, of course, that happened. Most extraordinary decision.
Well, the interesting point about that score that was given is that Neil Harvey had then passed Keith Miller. Neil was in his 60s when Keith was out for 58. But I can imagine your personal involvement. You say you never really get involved in broadcasting, but when Neil got up towards that 100, that must have been a moment for you.
I was very naughty in that case. He was so long in the 90s. I would say half an hour from memory, and he just couldn't get those last few runs. And I was broadcasting for 20 minutes. I think he scored 2 runs in my 20 minutes, but I felt so anxious about the young man, and I knew his family very well, particularly his brother Mervyn, with whom I played in an Australian 11 game. And I knew the family. There were several brothers in there, and they'd have been huddled around that radio. And Mother particularly, she was very keen on young Neil doing well over there. And I remember sending a message over, "Don't you worry, Mrs. Harvey, he'll get them."
But it didn't happen during your 20-minute shift of broadcasting. You were replaced by Rex Alston, and here's what happened when Neil was 99.
Laker to Harvey, Harvey having looked round at the field. Harvey 99, and here's this ball. Laker to Harvey, he drives in, they've taken the single and he's got it.
Neil Harvey has scored a century against England in his first test. It wasn't actually his first test match of his career. He had played, I believe, the year before against India.
That's right, Norman.
But as an innings for a youngster in his first test, would you rate it one of the greatest?
Yes, yes, he had a lot of things to overcome. First, nervousness, then the fact that Laker was spinning away from him, and the pressure from England players on a new player is intense, not only from England, but Australia to England. There's no love lost on a test match from either point of view. And so he suffered the pressure, and Norman Yardley skillfully manoeuvred his bowlers to try and prevent him, and he overcame all those troubles. And then when he got to about 40, he was really on top.
Great player. And of course, he was joined by, I believe the man was his roommate in Sam Loxton, and that was another partnership. I've heard this described as a batting revelation, the way they played. Loxton 93, Harvey 112, another century partnership. It must have been incredible cricket to watch the way the Australians were fighting back.
Well, it was power hitting by Sammy. He put the bowlers over the fence, I think, 5 times, and a very aggressive approach, which suited Harvey. And of course, they were great friends. They roomed a lot together, and they played for Victoria, both of them, and they had a common understanding. And I think Sammy, he had a great sense of value, Sammy. He knew what Harvey was going through, and he too took over from Miller and shepherded the young man. And then suddenly he realised, I haven't got to look after this fellow, I'll look after myself. And away went Sammy and really cracked everything he got up to him. It was one of the great innings to come on top of Miller and then live with Harvey. And see, maybe I'm taking a little bit of credit away from Harvey. I don't mean that, because he played a masterly innings, but Sammy and Keith, he would admit, were really behind him and helping him in his confidence and guiding him as to what these bowlers would do. He had not played against them up to that stage, you know.
Well, that middle-order performance by Australia, they went on to get 458. They only trailed by 38 on the first innings. And here's what the middle order did for Australia. Harvey 112, Loxton 93, Miller 58, and Ray Lindwall came in later and got 77, so Australia were right in the game. Then England came in for a second time, and I believe we were just about into the 4th day by this stage, and they scored 365, with Hutton getting 57, Washbrook 65, Edridge 54, Compton 66. They were 8 wickets down with a day's play left. Now, that second innings by England, Alan, must have been a very quick affair.
Well, there again in that innings, you see, they overcame the problem of Lindwall and Miller early. And it was finally up to Bill Johnson, to break the partnership. He took both the early wickets, and Johnson went on to take 4. But getting back to that innings of Lindwall of 77, I'm reminded of a comment by that great commentator and great friend Vic Richardson. He always classed Lindwall as great an all-rounder as Keith Miller. Few people will accept that, but I place great confidence in anything Vic said, and he was a great player himself. But Lindwall was a great all-rounder. A lot of people don't consider that very much, but he was. But then again, you come back to Bill Johnson's approach in that innings. He took both the early wickets, and then he went on to take 2 more. He was a great stalwart in that. He took the 2 wickets early when he was bowling leg spin.
Yes.
Babin always said he had 2 bowlers in one, didn't he?
Yes, capable of bowling with the new ball or taking the ball later on as bowling spinners.
Yeah.
Well, the fascinating point about the game is that 1 day's play left. Yardley had to make a decision what to do, and he batted on that final morning for just 5 minutes. Now, would you have done that as captain?
Yes, I would have. Knowing his intentions, actually, he didn't have a roller heavy enough, and I think the council sent down a big heavy roller. They used it in the streets, and he rolled that wicket because he thought it would break up. Well, I've never yet found a heavy roller to break a pitch up on the last day, and Yardley found that because it levelled it out a bit. Not that it wasn't a very bad pitch later when some wear came to it, But I'll never forget Yardley. He said to me, "I'll break this thing up if the last thing I do." And he battled on for a little bit to do that. And also, whilst he didn't want to lose, he thought, there's no way Australia can get this. I remember talking to Norman Yardley about it. He still, even when I talked to him last time I was in England a couple of years ago, he's still amazed that the game was won.
It was a monumental target, 404, and they had a total of 345 minutes playing time. Is this one of the great innings you can recall in the history of the game, the partnership there between Arthur Morris and Don Bradman?
I have never seen better. From all points of view, when the game ended, I went out and I measured 2 holes in the pitch with a ruler, and they were no less than 5 inches deep on an area that would be very nasty had they had a leg spin bowler, but they didn't have one. And when they did try that, Hutton bowled before lunch. Now, Norman Yardley at the end of the day was severely criticised for using Hutton. Now, how could he know that about an hour after play he brought Hutton in? That was a good time to bring him in, but Bradman says, no way. And he went after him. I think he hit 38 or 4 overs. And then the same thing happened with Compton. Yardley was forced to bowl Compton a lot. He was a googly left-arm bowler, not very good, but he could spin the ball. Morris realised the danger, and he went after him. And away went, I think, about 30 off the same number of overs from Arthur Morris. That in itself tied the game up. Hutton was not used again. Compton bowled a few more overs, but they had decided to kill the possibility of themselves getting out. Certainly they gave a couple of difficult chances. Well, they were sharp ones, and I don't blame Evans and Krapp for dropping them because they were pretty quick catches. But there was the attack. Now, from that point on, England were entirely without. Laker didn't take a wicket in 90-odd runs off his bowling in that last day. That would have been awkward for Morris, as you can imagine, left arm. But Morris, with his footwork down, he would go after him, and Bradman would go forward, and he'd come back. He never gave the bowlers, a chance. To me, one of the great innings, partnerships, I don't think I could ever imagine seeing better for purpose, desire, and general outmanoeuvring the opposition as those two players did. You see, Morris, you don't hear much of Arthur Morris today. He's the greatest left-arm opening batsman I've ever seen, and you can take any country. But he doesn't really get the credit these days that Bradman would get for his 173. Both played an equal part. And I'm sure Don would say that if I were to ask him. Yes, I was glad I had Arthur down that end.
Well, we have, deep from the vaults of the ABC, discovered just a nice little piece of commentary which is really a great milestone in cricket. It's the occasion of Don Bradman's last century in Test match cricket.
Now his leg bowling again to Bradman. Bradman 99, and he pushes that one very carefully to short leg. That one was a turner as well. Bradman looking a little bit worried now. Incidentally, we assume that he had cramp when about an hour ago, 3/4 an hour ago, he was holding his side rather painfully. We assume he hasn't strained anything because he doesn't seem in any trouble now. But he's made 99, his leg bowling trim. And this is a short one, this is 100.
So Don Bradman had reached his 100. It was his 19th against England. Nobody's ever got anything like that in the history of Test cricket. And that partnership went on, a wonderful partnership. Bradman remained 173 not out. Morris 182, 301 between the pair of them. Miller came in and went, and then it was up to a youngster, Neil Harvey, to come in to have the opportunity of scoring the winning run.
55 runs. He bowled 6 maidens, and although it wasn't policy to use a pace bowler all day long, whenever he was called upon, he did his job on a wicket that, if it suited any bowler, certainly suited a spinner. There was no leg spinner in the England side except Hutton, or Compton when he bowls his left arm googly, and neither of those looked good enough to worry great batsmen who were bent on taking up England's challenge of fast runs. They took it up and they met it. Well, now Cranston comes to bowl to Harvey. Harvey picks him off his toes, hits into the long-on boundary, and he's stolen a stump, and the ball's crossed the boundary, and it's all over.
So Australia had scored 3 for 404, won the game with 15 minutes to spare. What appeared to be, at the start, an almost impossible task.
Well, I gave them no chance, really. When I saw the pitch, when I went out early in the morning, there was no way they could get them. And you see, they got those runs in 344 minutes, and that's a lot over a run a minute. And I believe that was the greatest ever partnership I could ever hope to see because of everything I've earlier said. And to me, it was a great credit to both of them. And when I think back on it, I still can't believe it.
And Don Bradman's strike rate against England, the number of test matches he played to get those 19 centuries, was almost one every second test, wasn't it?
37 tests against England, 1900 you just said, didn't you?
Yes. Now, that match in all, the scoring rate throughout was quite amazing. If you add up the total of the 4 innings, you've got I think that's almost a record score for a test match.
Yes, it is. It is in a test match. Well, 3 scores over 400 and come into another one, 365 for 8. That's not a bad performance.
What was the total number of runs scored in the game?
1723.
Well, look, if you divide that by 5, you get an average of something like 345 per day.
Yeah.
Now, if we got 345 in a day's playing a test match these days, you'd think it was wonderful. Any way you look at that game, one of the greatest test matches ever played, the 4th test between England and Australia at Leeds in 1948. The second match under examination was played in 1960 in December between Australia and the West Indies, and it became known as the Fabulous Tie. Let's relive those marvellous moments from the Brisbane Cricket Ground with just 3 balls to bowl in the match.
Ball to Grout. Grout skies him. 3 of them, 4 of them getting under it. Canhigh gets it and it's dropped. It's dropped. Hall and Canhigh ran in for it. 4 of them converged on the ball. Hall dropped it. Hall eventually got his hands to it, but Canhigh came in and I'm sure he balked Hall in his efforts to catch that one. Australia requiring 3 runs to win. And 3 balls to go. Hall steps in off the mark. Shirt trailing behind him. Bowls to Mekov. Mekov pulls him high into the outfield. 4 runs. No, it won't get to the fence. They're going for the 3, though. Grout slides his bat behind the line. He's flying back, and he's out. Run out! Run out! Grout, run out! Two runs only. Australia still requiring 1 run to win. Australia 9 for 232 as Lindsay Klein comes out. The last man for Australia. 2 balls to go in this test match. All back at his bowling mark. He will bowl to Klein. And here's the single that wins the match for Australia. He's out! He's run out! The stumps are thrown down! Well!
So the match had finished in a tie, the first in the whole history of Test match cricket. Let's hear then the thoughts of Australia's number 11, Lindsay Klein.
When Davidson and Benno were batting, we thought we were through at that particular time, and then we lost quick wickets. I can't remember putting on my gear in the last few moments. But it was all excitement, and the players weren't quite certain of how many runs we needed and how many runs we were getting at that particular time. But when Wally was run out, they said, well, you're in, and away I went. And I think I got to the centre, and I can't remember walking out there. Frank Worrell did say to me as I passed him at the wicket, he said, gee, Lindsay, you look a little pale. And I said, Frank, I certainly feel it at the moment. And facing up the Wes Hall at that particular time, I think he walked back another 25 to 30 yards, and I felt as if he pushed off from the fence. And I can remember him running in, and I can remember saying to myself, when is he going to get here? It felt like half an hour, running in. It was just so much time, and so many things went through my mind at that particular time. But Ian Mekov and I had agreed to run on that particular ball. Didn't matter where it went, we were going to run. And to this day, Ian Mekov claims that I ran him out deliberately. He still claims that I ran him out deliberately. But as it turned out, it was quite funny. With Ian Mekov was running for a draw. He thought we were 1 run behind. I thought we were tied, and I was running for a win. So as it turned out, we didn't know until after the game who was correct.
And of course, history records the result was a tie. But we're looking at this match as a whole, not just the finish of it. And going right back before the game, Alan, the state of cricket in Australia, as far as spectators were concerned, wasn't all that good at that time.
No, well, there'd been lots of players 2 years earlier, and cricket was stagnant for the next 2 years after the loss of those great players. And we finally came right to the West Indies when they started in Western Australia. They didn't start well, and they went through Victoria. They played very well, but New South Wales, they were beaten, and it really hadn't gotten off the ground by the first test, and there was not a lot of interest. I think we'd had a fill of cricket in 2 years before when England were playing here at Brisbane, and they scored 36 runs before lunch in the 2-hour session. And here we found West Indies had scored 134, I think it was, in the same period. That livened the game up a little bit, but we weren't quite aware what was going to happen for the next few days. But we had really taken the West Indies a bit lightly. And the main problem they had was slow bowlers. They couldn't play slow bowlers. And that occurred and was emphasised when they played New South Wales. And Richie Benaud took 6 wickets for 61 in that match, New South Wales versus West Indies. And so things were not good. And they finally overcame Richie, particularly in that test match, when I think he had no wicket for 93 in the second innings, and took a real battering from Worrell and Sobers. But that's a story that will unfold, Norman, of the way Worrell and Benaud made that series from that day onward.
Yes, well, you made that point about Sobers and Worrell. That partnership on the first day was a classic of cricket. And the influence of Worrell only scored 65 compared to Sobers' 132. But Worrell, as we found out later, wasn't really a well man, was he?
No, Worrell was ill the whole time he was here. I remember going to see him in the dressing room. I'd heard he wasn't well. I knew very well Frank, and he used to ring me on occasions and convey his problems that he had. When I went to the dressing room, he was not out during that afternoon tea. And when I went in there on the massage table, he was fast asleep in the middle of his innings. That's what he suffered the whole time. But when I come back to think of him, the influence, when he said to me, prior to the test match in Brisbane, he said he was very worried about what Benaud was doing to his boys. And he said to me, Benaud did not bother me, but it bothered me to learn the effect he was having on my boys. And he set out to set an example. Sobers got 130, as you said, Worrell 65. That innings of Sobers, he still owes to Frank Worrell, as he's told me, that Frank guided me. And from once he guided him, and he took the strike for most part. He scored 65 in the first, 65 in the second. And he countered Benaud. And it not easy to do because the wicket was taking a little bit of spin then, and Benaud was a great bowler. But the influence he had on Sobers really put him on the line for that big score he made.
Of course, Sobers, up to that point on the tour, hadn't really made a score.
No, you're quite right, Norman. He couldn't get off the ground, could he? And with all his brilliance. But when he put it together in Brisbane, that was one of the greatest innings I've ever seen.
At stumps, the West Indies were 7 for 359, which means they maintained a run-a-minute rate right throughout the day. They went in on the second day to be all out for 453. But Australia got in front on the first innings, and there was an innings here by Norm O'Neill, ABC broadcaster, 181, a great knock.
Well, it was magnificent. Back foot play. I don't know what happened to Wes Hall. He couldn't believe it, but Norman was standing on his back foot and smashing Wes past him for fours down to the sideboard. Wes couldn't believe a man could be hit off a fast bowler like that, and he stood in amazement. And on occasions I saw Wes clap Norman when he hit one past him. That was Norman's best innings, perhaps. That's a big thing to say because I saw Norman play most of his innings, but I'd rate that as the greatest team effort that I've ever seen from O'Neill.
Well, the point about the two of them, Sobers and O'Neill, there was a contest almost between them to see who could hit the ball the harder.
Well, I'll give it to Sobers. I remember one ball he hit to Colin McDonald at mid-off. I forget the bowler, but Colin couldn't get out of the way. If he could have, he would have, I'm sure. He had to get two hands to it. It hit him in the hands near the chest and knocked him backwards about 2 yards. I've never seen a ball hit so hard as Colin McDonald would agree with me.
Well, Colin McDonald, of course, the Australian opener, he took a tough time from Wesley Hall. Australia in its first innings was all out for 505, a lead of 52. Now, listening to your broadcast, Alan, at the time, I just got the impression that Worrell would have been satisfied at that stage with a drawn game.
Yes, he was anxious to get a start because the team hadn't done well enough for him. And he was very anxious to win or draw, not to lose it, because he'd had a few losses, and that wasn't in character with Frank. And, well, that was the thoughts. I was in close contact with him in that match. As I said, I got to know him quite well, and I learned of his ill health. And I wondered that the man could really get through all that. And I do believe that he was the first. I've seen most of the West Indies from 1930 when I watched them. It was very difficult for Worrell because the islands of West Indies are separate completely. Jamaica's 1,000 miles from Trinidad, for example, and it was very difficult to get a Jamaican and a Barbadian and a Trinidadian and the island players together as a unit. No captain had succeeded in doing that, even in their own country and in Australia, and there was a division amongst the islands, and there still is to a degree in regard to trade as well. They don't trade amicably even now. And so for Worrell to put those 5-6 different people together, all in their own entity, whether he be a Jamaican or what he might be, it was very difficult to get them to play as a team, and he did. He was the first one to do it, and later on, of course, Clive Lloyd supported that and brought out the same results. But his job initially was to get his team as a unit, and he did it.
Well, he certainly succeeded in doing that, but in the match, it meant that Australia, after the West Indies made 284 in the second innings, wanted 233 to win. Now, they lost 6 wickets prior to tea, and the important point about this game is that Davidson and Benno were the not-out batsmen. Now, here's what happened to the 2 batsmen walking out after tea, and let's hear from Alan Davidson.
When we went back after tea, we still wanted, I think, 128 in about 120 minutes. And as we walked out, Richie and myself never said a word. As a matter of fact, we were pretty silent. But when we got out there, he just turned and he says, well, let's give it a go. And I said, OK. And I believe that was what made the series. A lot has been said about how the West Indies made the series. But I believe that in that last 2 hours, it would have been so easy for us to have just played for a draw. And yet, with 6 wickets down, Richie said, let's give it a go.
And the point there is that 99 times out of 100, I'd say, in Test cricket, it would have been play for a draw. But the influence of Richie Benno on that game has tended to be underrated a little bit.
Yes, Norman, it has. I'll give credit to both those captains, Benno and Worrell. They both played superbly. Alan Davidson made a lovely remark, when he said, let's give it a go. I can imagine Richie saying that. I didn't know. But to me, I would give credit to neither completely. Both. They did it.
And what of Davidson himself? His performance in that game was one of the greatest all-round performances in a Test match in history.
Well, he broke all records at that time in taking 11 wickets for 222 and scoring 124 runs. That's the first time it had ever been done. And a tremendous performance, particularly when the pressure was on him, on a wicket that was doing quite a lot, for him to support Benno as well as he did. They were a great combination, both in batting and bowling, those two fellas. And
the interesting thing was that Davidson was run out in that second innings for 80, and that run out, in fact, made the finish possible.
Yeah, it did. So many things made that possible, didn't it, Norman? Unbelievable to do all that. And what I'm interested in, as Klein said, he didn't know who won the game when he went into the pavilion.
The third match under review is the 4th Test between England and Australia in Manchester in 1961. In this match, Australia batted first, made only 190. England replied with 367 to lead by 177 on the first innings. Then Australia made 432 because of a great start by Laurie and Simpson. And by the way, this was the first match in which Laurie and Simpson opened together for Australia. And by the time of the last morning, Australia was 150 in front with 4 wickets in hand, and then David Allen, the off-spinner, took 3 wickets for 1 run, getting rid of Mackay, Benno and Grout, and it looked then as if Australia was beaten. Then started a last wicket stand between Davidson and Mackenzie. And let's hear some wonderful hitting here by Alan Davidson, and it's the TV commentary from Jim Swanton.
Brings Davidson to Allen's end again. Oh, and he's hit him high into the outfield for 6. Over extra cover. Beautiful hit with the spin. 305 minutes left to play. And he hits that one very hard indeed for 4 runs. between the bowler and long off. I don't think he worries so much about Mackenzie at that far end, but I see that the offside field is coming all in now to save one, but they may not save four. There it is. Davidson's 50. He hit that high for 6. What a fine piece of play.
And that was 20 off 1 over. Davidson from Allen.
Well, they were made up of 0, 4, 0, 4, 6, 6. Tremendous bit of hitting. When I came into the ground that morning, I walked in with Alan Davidson, and he was limping. And I just said to him, well, you've got a big job in front of you today, Alan. He said, well, I don't know, Mac, as long as I can stay with them, the others will have to do it because I can hardly hold a bat. My hand is so sore. Well, I watched him in the first few overs, and every time the ball hit the bat, he took his hand off, and he was in real pain. But somehow he leant forward to a ball. I almost thought it was an accident. He just hit through the ball and went for 6. And whether it really made him think of, look, I've got a responsibility myself, I don't know, but he was a changed man from then on, and then he hit those magnificent 20 off the over. But coming to that, whilst he did that, I think a great deal of responsibility was on Mackenzie. It was a real, I can use the expression, a gutsy innings. It reminded me of that only 7 months before when Lindsay Klein and Ken Mackay stayed up and held out West Indies. But Mackenzie played beautifully. He scored 32 out of those 98, and Mackenzie never looked in doubt. It shows what can come out of Mackenzie, even his bowling, you know, Norman. When things were down, he'd come back and take a wicket or two, and here was another expression of the batsmanship. It wasn't a great bat, but my word, he played with the green cap and he said that day, Norman.
Well, Mackenzie, assisting Davidson, as you said, 98 for the last wicket, which meant that England had to score 256 in just on 4 hours. It was a target that was really possible, and here we saw one of the great short innings of modern cricket. And the batsman for England is Ted Dexter.
That's gone through, and that is 50. He's hit 10 fours in that, and he's been batting 2 minutes over the hour. Square cut, beautiful shot. 4 more. He's hit him into the crowd now. Magnificent shot over long on. Superb stroke. He caught behind the wicket. Dexter caught behind by Grout off Benno for 76.
At that point, England were 2 for 150, requiring only 106 to win. But that innings of Dexter's, Alan, how do you rate that one?
The best from Ted, in my opinion, that I've ever seen, or could be seen. It was a magnificent display of hitting. Paul Mackay went out of the ground 2 or 3 times, and once off the back foot. A great innings. 76, I'll remember it. And that, of course, was the turning point of the game.
And when he got out, he didn't even look at the umpire.
Oh, that was a splendid bit of sportsmanship from Ted. He chased a wide one outside the off stump, and Grout never misses them. He snicked it. Ted didn't even look at the umpire. He just walked straight to the pavilion. It was really not standing there waiting. It was a beautiful bit of sportsmanship.
And another important thing for that ball, Richie Benno, the leg spinner, had changed from over the wicket to round the wicket, and thereby hangs a tail.
That, Norman, is where the game was won and lost, at that very point.
Back to the game, and the next batsman is England's captain, Peter May.
He can almost pitch the ball, really, Jim, on a sixpence. That's one of his great assets.
He's bowled May behind his legs, has he? Yes, he's out. Bowled behind his legs. And the picture changes with a vengeance.
England's number 5 is Brian Close.
I can't think, Dennis, that he's going to connect in this way, can you?
No, it's, I must say, it's the most extraordinary sort of batting at the moment from Brian Close.
Doesn't seem any sort of reason for this sort of approach at all. You've only got to get just over a run a minute. Now he's hit him for 6. Yes, it's gone for 6. Just as he hit him. And he's caught behind square leg. It's almost inevitable.
So in quick succession, Richie Benaud, around the wicket, had taken the wickets of Peter May and Brian Close. Peter May seemed stunned when he was bowled by that ball round his legs.
Well, listening to the commentary by my good friend Jim Swanton, he was as dumbfounded as May. May just couldn't believe it. He stood there for moments. The ball was pitched about a foot outside the leg stump and it curled round the back of his legs. He fended at it, but it was a very bad attempt. He didn't put his pad there, which would have protected him. And he stood there, couldn't believe it. But Grout was standing well back, and there was no doubt the ball had bowled him. It was hard to see from the broadcasting box, but anyhow, he took his message and said, off I go. But it was an extraordinary ball from Richie Benaud to get so far round behind his legs.
And the reason for Benaud going round the wicket, what was it? The bowler's footmarks had churned up the pitch there?
Yes, Norman. I fancy that Neil Harvey had something to do with that. They were very close together as captain, and he was advisor to Richie as vice-captain. I fancy they just had a little chat and said, what about trying it? And there it happened. But Harvey, I think, played a prominent part in that, and Richie Benaud accepted the thought, and then he hit those footmarks, and there were substantial marks in the pitch there, and the ball started to turn viciously.
And the innings by Close, which was short and sweet, but it didn't please the English selectors very much, did it?
It didn't please Jim Swanton when I heard that it was almost inevitable. I thought that was a really good remark because it was absolutely one of the worst innings I could have ever seen. He certainly went down the wicket and slashed him over the top for 6. He only scored 8. But he kept swinging to balls outside the off-stump and tried to hit him round backward square leg. Didn't take long for Richie to wake up to that, and he put his best fieldsman there too, O'Neill, and he put him right in the right spot, and a couple of balls, and he holed out. Really good bit of captaincy, a good catch, but a dreadful shot. To me, it amazed me. I was in the broadcasting box with Norman Yardley, a former captain and a fellow commentator, and he really roasted Brian Close. And as Jim said, inevitable. That was what Norman kept saying. It was such a vicious attack on another Yorkshireman that I couldn't believe it. I had to walk out of the box. I said, Norman, gee, you're going overboard here. And he was ultimately reprimanded by the members of the Yorkshire Committee for abusing a fellow Yorkshireman, and certainly gave him all the stick he could. But I couldn't stand listening. I thought, oh, Norman, come on, cool it. But Norman just went on.
Well, the story doesn't finish there because Benaud continued to bowl round the wicket, and the sheet anchor of the innings, just before tea, was the Indian Raman Sabarao.
He's clean bowled. Sabarao bowled by the last ball before tea.
Yes, he's caught by Simpson at slip. Murray caught Simpson, bowled Benaud. Benaud's now taken 5 for 53, 5 for 53, and England really in a bad mess now. 171 for 6.
Bowling over the wicket gives him more chance of a leg before wicket than going round.
Oh, magnificent catch by Simpson. What a fine catch. Left-handed there. He's a fine step fieldsman. So that's Allen out, caught Simpson, bowled Benaud for 10. England 189 for 8. Benaud now 6 wickets.
And Benaud had broken the back of England's batting. The interesting point there is that we heard of 2 catches by Bob Simpson. How do you rate those? He was a wonderful slip fieldsman.
The first one was straightforward. Well, it wasn't straightforward. It was a jolly good catch. But when he caught Allen, that was an amazing catch. He had no reason to expect it was going to go as fine as it did. He was moving to his right, switched back, got to his left, and he was only about 3 yards from the bat, picked it up left hand. Things were running for Australia then. Well, why shouldn't they? If you're going to get support from a fieldsman like that, you deserve all the breaks. And those catches I'll ever remember. They turned the game completely when he dismissed those 2 fellas. But Richie then realising that he was spinning too much, he was better going over the wicket. And that's where another decision came that went his way. But why did it go his way? He was a great captain, and he worked it out. And he got support from Simpson. You wouldn't see two better catches in the game than those two by Bobby Simpson.
And the Australian voice you heard there, by the way, was Jack Fingleton. Well, let's hear the last rites of the fourth test at Manchester in 1961 with Davidson bowling to Statham.
Team bowled. Australia have won and they've kept the Ashes. They've won by 54 runs. Congratulations to Australia, to Richie Benaud and his men. A really surprising victory after the turn of fortune today. I don't think anyone would have backed them, and England were 150 for 1.
Now, it meant then that Australia had won the match by more than 50 runs. I believe, Alan, the last 9 wickets fell for just on 50 or something like that. An amazing finish.
9 wickets for 51. They went from 150 when Dexter got out to 201 all out. It was amazing. As I earlier said, Norman, I believe England lost that. Australia won it, certainly, by some skillful catching and good captaincy. But to have 9 wickets in hand and the score on 150 and you only wanted 106, you can't believe that England could lose that.
So that was the fourth test, Australia versus England, Manchester in 1961, the third of Alan McGilvray's greatest matches. Alan, just before you make your assessment of the 3 games, I'd just like to raise another match which was played much more recently. This is in 1982. It was the fourth test between England and Australia, when Australia was set 292 to win, and they lost their 9th wicket at 218, and Alan Border and Jeff Thompson required a last wicket stand of 74 to win the game, and they failed by just 3 runs. Now, that almost qualifies as one of the greatest matches in history for Australia.
Yes, the finish did. It was another one of those great Australian last wicket partnerships, Norman. We've mentioned 2 or 3. And it was a great performance by Jeff Thompson. He went out to see Border and he said, look, I'll just stick around, we'll get these. That was the confidence. And he did that. He just kept giving the strike to Alan Border. And then along came the 4 runs, and it was Botham who was bowling to him, and it was a full length. And I can imagine Jeff saying to himself, here it is, a half volley outside the off stump, here it is. And he let fly at it. He snicked it. It flew to Tabaret fielding at first slip, and then went over his right shoulder, and Miller ran round behind it and took the catch. I never saw a sadder man in my life than Jeff Thompson as he walked off. And I believe when, in the dressing room, Greg Chappell, the skipper, said, when he comes in the room, say nothing, because he knew just how Jeff would feel. And he sat down on the chair, said nothing, and then he got up after some moments, and all I believe he said was, I'm sorry, fellas. And he was met by his skipper, Greg, who went over and I believe this is what occurred. He said, thanks for what you did, Jeff. It was absolutely great. Well done. And that was typical Greg Chappell. But it never really counted the disappointment of Jeff Thompson. He was one of the greatest Australian cricketers I've ever known for team approach. Nothing was too great for Jeff. And a lot of people didn't believe or see him that way. But I did see him as a really good Australian. And he'd bowl or bat his heart out as he did then. Great effort, but sorry it didn't come off. But Jeff was upset. He really was.
Yes, well, I've always said that if I had my choice of the 2 players of the team they had, that you'd want in that situation of a batsman and a tail-ender, that Border and Thompson were the best 2 to have.
Absolutely. But Border, of course, can't be forgotten. But he was in form, but Jeff didn't bat very well. But when it was wanted, I haven't seen him do it before, too.
You know what amazed me about that, Alan, was that last day, I think they wanted 37 or something to win, and 20,000 people turned up. It could have went all over in one ball.
Isn't it amazing, the Melbourne crowd, how they support Australian cricket, not only cricket, but I've seen a lot of it. Yes, 20,000 came into the ground, and Jeff realised the responsibility, and he hung in.
Just couldn't make it.
No.
Well, just to close off the program, Alan, you've assessed in detail 3 matches. Leeds 1948, Don Bradman's team, the Tide Test 1960, fourth Test Manchester 61. Which really is your greatest?
Well, 1948 must be ever the greatest cricket match I've ever witnessed for its overall interest throughout the 5 days. The fight, the setbacks, the regaining of confidence, the building yourself back. Even Alec Betts, who got 70-odd in the first innings, going in as a night watchman. All that had some meaning of character within the men. And every one of those men out there played for their country, and it made a tremendous contest.
So, Alan McGilvray's greatest match is the fourth Test at Leeds, England versus Australia, in 1948. The game goes on with Alan McGilvray.
Well, now Cranston comes to meet to boulder Harvey. Harvey picks him off his toes, hits him to the long-on boundary, and he's stolen a stump, and the ball's crossed the boundary, and it's all over.
The ABC Sports Vault.